SpaceX continues to push hard, getting their second launch pad here in Starbase built, and after assembling the Chopsticks this week, they were installed on the tower. Along with that, crews have pushed ahead with digging out the flame trench and are starting to install the main parts of Pad B's tank farm. In addition, we did a flyover this week and got a fantastic view of how Pad B will be laid out and how exactly SpaceX intends to use this far more upgraded pad design with all the lessons learned from Pad A to launch way more frequently. Howdy Tank Watchers, I'm Jack Beyer for NSF, and this is your Starbase Update, sponsored by Massey. First off, let's start at Massey's, where we have the ship static fire stand, or the crab stand as it's affectionately known, just parked outside and waiting for Ship 34 to be ready for static fire testing, which could be relatively soon, but we'll talk about that a bit later. Now, if we look over to the test stand cage, where SpaceX has already tested Test Tank 16 and Booster 14.1, teams have been modifying it to possibly support a Block 2 booster test tank. SpaceX has installed 19 of what appear to be arms set up to have hold-down clamps on them inside of the test structure. When anything gets 10 or 20 of something added in a circle at Starbase, it usually means it's for a booster, because the booster has 20 outer engines. By the way, the 20th arm is laying on the ground next to the stand in this shot. We've all been waiting for SpaceX to roll out a Block 2 booster test article forever. And it is possible that Booster 17 is the final Block 1 booster, since Pad B, which will be necessary to launch it, is coming along nicely. SpaceX needs to either start testing, and soon, or they just need to stack a Block 2 booster and be okay with retrofits. Spoiler, they are. This is important because teams need something to launch from Pad B once it's done and they have the sign-off on the facility. Over between the two cryo-proof stations is a new metal ring being constructed. It's currently unknown what this will be used for, but it's possible it may be used with test articles for testing. Looking elsewhere in Massey's, we can still see some remains of Booster 12's hot stage ring that was cut up a while ago. So far, SpaceX has not updated the design of the hot stage ring, but it is expected to come alongside Block 2 of the booster, so like many things in Starbase, we'll have to wait and see. Another noticeable change at Massey's is the addition of a pair of embeds next to the methane tank farm. These will likely be for a horizontal tank to increase storage capacity at the Massey outpost. Next up, tons of progress has been made on the housing area that is between Massey's and the production site just off of Highway 4. Originally, this was called Rio West and might still be, and it was going to be home to a grocery store and a restaurant, but probably not anymore. The current construction points to yet more housing for people working at Starbase, which, given the amount of cars parked here, makes sense. We'll have to wait and see if any public facilities ever get built here. I still think that if someone put up an ice cream stand or a bar anywhere along Highway 4, after or around the soft roadblock, they'd make a killing. Really, even a pay toilet would rake in the dough, but I digress. Let's move right along. Let's skip over the Sanchez lot, as there is a ton of Pad B stuff there to cover, and move over now to the production site. Mary and I caught a really good shot of the structure that SpaceX has been building inside the high bay. This structure is a possible updated Starlink loader, although it's hard to tell where the possible Starlinks would leave this structure to be loaded into a Starship. This is needed since SpaceX scrapped the old box that they had from back in the Ship 24 and Ship 25 days, and they can't really use the method that was used on Ship 33, where they loaded one at a time in the open air. If they tried to load one at a time, it would take a long time, as Block 2 ships can hold around 54 Starlink satellites. Also, that was a temporary setup, very clearly. It had slings going around the forward flap actuator arms and just wasn't ideal in the long term. Moving over now to Mega Bay 2, where we have Ship 34 and Ship 35. Now, Ship 34 has completed its cryogenic proof testing and has since received at least a few engines and possibly both of its aft flaps. Unfortunately, we can only see one engine moving towards Ship 34, as it was being moved from the door that goes between Mega Bay 2 and the Star Factory, and not through the main entrance of Mega Bay 2. Now, since SpaceX is moving them through that door, that means we don't know how many engines Ship 34 has, or what their serial numbers are, because SpaceX may have moved some with the main door closed and not partially open, meaning we just can't see what they're doing. It's just another example of us losing views due to the advancements of the Starship program. It's a little bittersweet, and as much as it's sad for us, it's great going forward for quality control in the program and for eliminating foreign object debris problems. You don't want anything in a Raptor that's not supposed to be there. And if you want to keep your feet clear of foreign object debris, then here's a word from today's video sponsor, Massey. If you've been watching Starbase Live, then you already know the weather here has been absolutely atrocious lately. In fact, the night before Starship Flight 7's remote camera setup, I went to put on my boots so I could come out here and begin setting up cameras, and they were absolutely soaked. Nobody wants to wear wet boots, especially not on a cold, rainy, and windy night. Luckily, this video's sponsor, Massey, had sent me a pair of their Alta high-top waterproof boots to try out. And I don't care if this sounds cheesy, it's exactly what happened, and I've been wearing them ever since to sort of try them out in the harsh and unforgiving conditions of Starbase. I have to say, they passed the test with flying colors. When I'm wearing these, my feet stay warm and dry. And that makes me a happy guy. I'm out here day in and day out, trying to get great shots of Starship and keep our robot army running. My Vessies have been keeping up as I explore the beach, explore the Rio, explore the wetlands, and they've been keeping my feet warm and dry. I cannot stress this enough. Warm and dry. Embrace every rainy day and say yes to every adventure in 2025 with Vessi. Take your first step into 2025 with confidence. Go to vessi.com/NSF2025 for waterproof boots that go great with any outfit. And you'll get 15% off your first order too. Thanks again to Vessi for sponsoring this video. The other ship inside Mega Bay 2, Ship 35, had its aft section rolled into Mega Bay 2 on Friday and is likely already stacked as of this recording. This makes 3 Block 2 ships completed in 6 months. Now, this ship is slated to fly on Starship Flight 9, which could be an incredibly important mission, assuming Flight 8 goes well. If you all remember, Ship 35 already had cutouts for the ship catch pins in its payload bay when it rolled out of the Star Factory. So, once this ship rolls out for cryogenic proof testing, we could see some really cool and, importantly, new hardware. Now, over in Star Factory, we have Ship 36's nose cone, which has been stacked onto its payload bay inside the factory. This is a massive step for the production of vehicles, as the big open high bay is no longer needed like it was with Ship 33, 34, and 35. This also means SpaceX now has an operational turntable and welding robot in the larger parts of Star Factory and could even stack other sections together before rolling them into Mega Bay 2. This would reduce time on the Mega Bay 2 turntable and quicken stacking times. Another bonus is that this will make Ship 36 the first ship to be fully stacked inside a controlled environment and not an open bay or tent. Do you see a theme here? SpaceX is really pushing hard for a much cleaner vehicle assembly environment overall. Finally, this is another nail in the coffin for the high bay, as it now serves to store the new structure we covered earlier and to scrap older vehicles. Eventually, this bay will most likely get replaced with a gigabay like the one laid out for Roberts Road. And if you want more information on that, watch our KSC flyover, which will be out on Tuesday. There will be tons of info, not only on Roberts Road, but the Starship pad at Launch Complex 39A and much more. With the payload bay stacked, the next step is to roll to Mega Bay 2 for stacking on its forward dome, which is seen here in the Star Factory. But Ship 35 needs to move on to a work stand before that can happen. Next to Ship 36 on the tiling station is Ship 37's nose cone, getting its heat shield, while Ship 38's nose cone patiently waits its turn. Now, there is a road closure on February 4th from 12 a.m. to 4 a.m. Central for a 2-hour transport from the factory to Massey's. This could be for Ship 34 or possibly for Test Tank 16, which, if you remember, is a Block 2 ship aft test article. Why Test Tank 16 though? Well, since shortly after Flight 7, which was a little over 2 weeks ago as I record this, Test Tank 16 has been inside the Star Factory getting work done. Teams have added ramps over the stringers like what was on Ship 33, and if you all remember, these started coming apart on the ascent at Starship Flight 7, but they were not the cause of the failure. Crews are probably trying to test and make them more sturdy, so that's a good thing. Last up, on the production site, we have seen chine sections sitting outside of Mega Bay 1, and some have even gone inside the Star Factory. These are likely off of Booster 14, as it still sits inside Mega Bay 1. Back when Booster 12 was caught, it only spent about 2 weeks inside the bay. This development, and the fact that Booster 14 is still inside, says that SpaceX might have some future plans for this booster. Please, 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 please. Next up is the Sanchez lot, where there is a ton of work being completed on Pad B infrastructure. Quickly, before we go into depth on all of that, let's look first at a few other things. First off, there is still the new third booster transport stand sitting unfinished near the entrance to the Sanchez lot. It is unclear when SpaceX will finish this stand, but for now, they don't need it. Looking next to it, there's a new black rectangle with what looks like white quick disconnects on the four corners. This could be the transporter for the Starlink loader that was mentioned earlier, but it's really hard to tell anything more without a closer look. Next to that, another white ring is being constructed, which is a workstation platform for Star Factory. SpaceX has been seen building these and carrying them straight into the factory as it continues to be kitted out with all the tooling and hardware necessary to build all the vehicles that are going to get us to the moon and Mars. Looking up into the scrapyard, we can see that there's nothing left of booster 14.1, which was scrapped a few weeks ago. And unfortunately, the nose cone of Ship 26 still exists. For some reason, SpaceX still hasn't scrapped it. I really hope they don't use it for anything, because then Kevin and the Ship 26 fan club will never shut up about it. The new SPMT, or self-propelled modular transporter yard, is just next to the scrapyard. It has been moved from the area next to the old Starlink building. This area has since been turned into mobile homes for more housing. Here, we can see a telescoping grove crane with its wheels off for an unknown reason. Next to the crane, we can see just how many SPMTs SpaceX has at its disposal to move equipment and vehicles around Starbase. This is so cool. I've always wondered just how many were here in Starbase. Looking to the north of the Sanchez lot, we can see the rocket garden, where Booster 12 sits proudly on the last old booster transport stand, with all of its engines removed. Maybe, hopefully, sometime in the future, once SpaceX switches over to Raptor 3 and they have older Raptor 2s that they don't use anymore, teams can place those Raptors on Booster 12, clean them up, paint them, and then put Booster 12 on display closer to Highway 4 for everyone to pass by and see the first booster ever caught. Just like Falcon 9 Booster 1019 in Hawthorne. The only other vehicles in the rocket garden now are Ship 32 and Ship 20. Now, with the high bay no longer needed for any more stacking operations, and once the possible Starlink loader leaves, SpaceX may scrap these last two ships to free up some room. Although I kinda hope they don't scrap Ship 20 at this point, it's sort of iconic. Next to Booster 12 are the two new booster transport stands and their adapters, which are waiting to be used to take Booster 15 to the launch site hopefully soon. Now we get to the fascinating stuff. Pad B hardware. First, we have the orbital launch mount for Pad B, which has lost a lot of scaffolding on the top deck as crews finish welding the water-cooled steel plate. Just to give a refresher, there are 3 levels to this mount. The bottom level for support, the middle level, which will hold the hold-down arms and clamps, and then the top level, which is a water-cooled steel deck. This mount is a major upgrade over the current orbital launch mount being used on Pad A. With the beefier construction and added water cooling, this should be able to launch much more frequently than the current design. Looking at the mount, you may be asking, where will the booster QD go? Well, there's a funny theory regarding that, and we'll cover it once we start talking about the flame trench in just a bit. With this deck fully installed, the next steps will likely be to install the rest of the water manifolds once they arrive. These will allow for water flow through this mount to cool it off and cool the deck off, just like pretty much every other launch pad in the world works. After that, the hold-down arms must go in along with all their associated hardware and other systems. Sitting under this mount, in the flame trench, are going to be a pair of water-cooled flame deflectors like what was installed at the Massey outpost and what is getting installed at the new Raptor vertical test stands in McGregor. This type of flame deflector has worked well in the past, so why not use it for the orbital launch pad, right? There's still lots of work to do on these deflectors, not to mention the flame trench itself, before they roll to the pad for installation, but boy, that's going to be cool to see. As part of that work, crews continue to add more and more piping to these deflectors every day. And it's really going to look cool when finished, and hopefully they remain cool under the rear end of an igniting super heavy booster. In terms of other equipment for Pad B at Sanchez, the main part of the ship quick disconnect arm still doesn't have any cryo piping installed inside. This is expected to get installed before a rollout and installation on the tower. Another piece that is missing is the other arm piece that will have the actual ship quick disconnect plate installed. It is expected that SpaceX will build a new one, but so far nothing has shown up. Other than those 3 major pieces, there are tons of cryogenic propellant lines, high-pressure gas lines, and even the 2 chopstick actuators that will likely go to the pad soon for installation. Speaking of the chopsticks, yes, I know last week was like all chopsticks, but it's a big milestone that these are now installed on Pad B's tower. Here, we can see the Buckner LR11000 in a V-frame configuration lift the entire assembly onto the tower. This was a multi-hour process, as when lifting something of this size, you can't go fast. Crews then had to connect up the rigging and then make sure the correct amount of counterweights were on the crane so that it wouldn't tip over when it picked up or rotated the assembly. Then, as they slowly lifted it up, there were a pair of pneumatic winches on the rigging that can be adjusted remotely to ensure the sticks are level when being lifted. During the lift, the crane itself had to pick up, then back out of the way of the assembly jig, lift the sticks again, then swing over and move to a position to attach them to the tower. It was so cool to watch as the crew lined up the carriage arms to install the pins that attach the carriage skates onto the tower. This process took most of the night, and by the next day, the carriage was lowered to the chop stop by the crane before it was disconnected. With this phase completed, the traveling block, which is what attaches to the top pin that holds the arms to the carriage like seen here on Pad A, was then installed on Saturday. With this now installed on the chopsticks, crews can then begin the process of reeving the cable through the traveling block and back down through the tower. The cable has to go up from the winch and through the pulleys at the top of the tower, then come back down and get hooked through the traveling block. Then it goes back up the tower and back down into the spool and deadline anchored. Usually, a specialized team will come in and rig the carriage to the tower. The traveling block has a change compared to the one on Pad A. It has an extra sheave on the block itself, which is another spot to wrap the cable around. If they use all 6, they should have an easier time lifting heavier loads, since they have more mechanical advantage. This is likely needed since, down the line, SpaceX will be lifting Starships with a payload on board, and these might be 100 to 200 tons of extra weight. Once this is completed, crews then need to install the 2 actuators that connect each arm to the carriage so that the arms can open and close on their own. The stabilization arms used to stabilize boosters and ships also need to be installed, and so far, we haven't seen these lying around, so SpaceX probably still has to build them. Moving on now, finally, to Pad B itself, we can see the fantastic progress that SpaceX has made in building this next-generation Starship launch pad. First off, we have the flame trench, which is hard to tell without a good reference point, but this trench is nearly as big as the trenches that are at LC-39A and LC-39B at Kennedy Space Center. Those trenches are 13 meters deep, 18 meters wide, and 137 meters long. The numbers for the one at Starbase aren't fully known yet since it isn't finished, but it has a decent chance of rivaling the flame trenches at Launch Complex 39. It's almost as if building a rocket the size of Saturn V or Nova requires a large flame trench to launch safely or some other type of water deluge system. It just goes to show the lessons learned by SpaceX when trying something new, like with Orbital Launch Pad A, which didn't quite work well at first. Rest in peace, Danger Van. Hey, you can't say when SpaceX says first principles, they don't mean it. As discussed before, this pad and trench will have 2 exits along with the 2 flame diverters situated under the launch mount, which will sit above the flame trench right around here. When the engines fire, rather than the 360-degree blast wave we've seen from Pad A, there will be just 2 exhaust plumes shooting out of the trench exits. This design, along with the water systems, will help dampen sound, control the initial shock waves of launch and ignition, and protect the surrounding area much better than Pad A's open design. In addition to adding a flame trench, SpaceX may have moved the booster quick disconnect to the other side of the pad, so if they continue to perform their tower avoidance maneuver at liftoff, they won't cook the booster quick disconnect. And with it out from under the sticks, they can't cook it with a landing burn during a catch either. It's currently unknown how this booster QD will attach to the booster, as it doesn't seem to be connected to the orbital launch mount. It might overhang the mount from the side of the trench. However, this is mostly speculation, since they're still building the pad and we haven't seen any pieces of the booster QD yet. We'll just have to wait and see. As seen in this image, crews are starting to pour concrete into the trench, but this isn't the main floor yet. This is just a binding layer of concrete to create a clean, hard surface to then set up and pour the floor of the flame trench. Going a bit north, we can see 2 pairs of embeds that are on either side of the commodities trench. Those are for sets of water tanks that will supply the large amount of water that is needed for Pad B. In fact, most of these tanks were spotted near the Port of Brownsville connector road. Once these embeds are finished and SpaceX no longer needs to access the commodities trench in that location, we'll probably see these roll to the pad for installation. This system looks to be the same setup as Massey's, where they are using liquid nitrogen to help build pressure rather than straight high-pressure gas like at Pad A. Like all of you, we can't wait to see SpaceX test this much more upgraded system for the first time. Now, if we follow the commodities trench going east, we get to Pad B's fluid bunker, subcoolers, and pump area. Now, this is very different compared to Pad A. At Pad A, SpaceX has 5 pumps and 8 subcoolers for liquid oxygen, and 4 pumps with 4 subcoolers for liquid methane. At Pad B, SpaceX looks to only have 3 subcoolers in total, 2 liquid oxygen and 1 liquid methane, which is still right over here at the Sanchez lot. Of the two liquid oxygen subcoolers, one is probably for ship and the other booster. Now, in terms of pumps, we don't know the exact amount of pumps as the pump pad is currently under construction. The flow of propellant will go from the tanks to this pump pad, then back to this valve area, then over to the subcoolers, then finally into the commodities trench and to the tower and orbital launch mount. These lines here, which are larger, should be for liquid oxygen and liquid methane. These will then hit this square here and then split off to the tower and through this trench under construction to the orbital launch mount itself. Now, you may be asking, how are they going to fill Starship as fast with less subcoolers and possibly even fewer pumps? Well, that's the beauty of this system. It's much more efficient, and SpaceX has added more vaporizers to be able to backfill the tanks quicker than in the past. That's how, even on the last launch, they were able to lower propellant loading times even with a larger ship. These subcoolers are bigger than the current ones that are being used for Pad A, and these are also plumbed so that the return propellant during detanking operations will go back through these subcoolers and into the tanks. SpaceX might be setting up to put subcooled propellant back into the storage tanks. However, we don't know yet if they actually plan on doing that, as usually the storage tanks are kept just below boil-off temperature. In addition, the propellant lines that are going up to the pad are larger, which would allow for a higher flow rate at a lower pressure. That means less work for the pumps. Overall, it's really cool to see the lessons that SpaceX has learned over the years, building their own launch pad and tank farm from scratch. And we can't wait to see this design improve on itself and get built at the other Starship launch pads, including the one next door to Pad B. Speaking of the iconic Pad A, with it being 2 weeks since the launch of Flight 7, refurbishment is progressing well. SpaceX continues to work on the booster quick disconnect by installing what looks like a leak test fixture. It's unknown if they've used this before, since there's a chance we just never caught them using it, but it was most likely used to leak check the lines in quick disconnect plate itself. The next thing for Pad A will be the static fire of Booster 15, which, as we talked about last week, recently received its grid fins. The sign to look for that this pad is ready for a booster again will be the purging of the booster quick disconnect and the Mounts 20 Raptor quick disconnects. As you can see through the flyover images, SpaceX will have a fun time getting the booster to the pad with all the construction going on. And as for when Flight 8 might launch, well, an FCC license was dropped on January 30th, giving a net date of February 15th. Now, considering neither the ship or the booster has even static fired yet, and we are still waiting to hear about the mishap investigation into Flight 7, it is doubtful it will go on that date. That doesn't put February out of the realm of possibility though, but like everything in Starbase, I'm gonna say it again, we'll just have to wait and see. Well, that will about cover it for this week. A ton of incredible shots of the new pad construction and lots to learn regarding how it's being built. And if you want to see more in full res, be sure to check out our YouTube member program. Thanks again to Vessi for sponsoring this video. Say yes to every opportunity in 2025 with Vessi. Explore vessi.com/NSF2025 for the ultimate waterproof footwear and start your year with 15% off your first order. We'll see you next Monday for another Starbase update. As always, don't forget, be excellent to each other.